Hi, my name is Marc Victor. I'm a criminal defense attorney for the past 16 years. I'm also a certified specialist in criminal law by the State Bar of Arizona. I have a law firm in Chandler, Arizona. I've represented thousands of people in major felony cases in the state of Arizona, both in state court and in federal court. I've also represented people outside the state of Arizona. And today I'm here to talk a little bit about what to do when you get pulled over by the police. Now, I'm going to be giving you some general advice, some specific advice as well, but the specific advice will be specific to Arizona only. And so if you're watching this and you're outside the state of Arizona, some of it may not apply to you. But the general advice will, because it deals with United States constitutional provisions, and of course that applies in all 50 states. If you have a specific situation that you're dealing with, my recommendation is that you consult an attorney to talk about the specific facts involved in your matter. Also, I want to say that I'm not going to be able to cover everything here today, but I have written some articles that may be helpful. They can be found on my website. The first article is entitled Surviving a Traffic Stop, and I entitled it that because I think that's what your goal should be at a traffic stop. So you may want to take a look at that article. Also, there's another article entitled Don't Be Your Own Worst Enemy, and that has some more general advice, not specific to traffic stops, but more specific to the criminal justice system, just generally. So you may want to take a look at that one. And then finally, there's an article there entitled Legalize Methamphetamine. Don't be scared by the title. Take a look at it. It's my argument for why we really need to end the drug war. The best piece of advice that I can give you is to not be pulled over by the police. That's the best thing, really. If you're driving down the road and you have a tail light out, or you have any light out, or your registration is expired, or you have any kind of a safety problem, a cracked windshield, bald tires, or you're speeding, or you're making an improper turn, a police officer will see that as a bright billboard above your car that says, "Pull me over, free stop." So don't be a free stop. Also, I want to point out, it doesn't matter what the officer was actually thinking at the time the officer pulled you over. So, if the officer was thinking, this is somebody I'd like to just go talk to maybe ask them questions about if they have drugs or other contraband, so I'll follow them for a while and see if I can find some kind of a minor traffic violation, that's constitutionally permissible. It's not a problem. It doesn't matter what the officer was thinking. It only matters that the officer had some reason to pull you over. So check your vehicle before you drive. Make sure that you are not committing any type of a small violation that makes you an easy pullover for a police officer. Lots of things can go wrong at a traffic stop. Traffic stops are tense and they are stressful, especially for police officers. A traffic stop is among the most dangerous situation for a police officer. So understandably, many police officers are stressed and they're tense, they're somewhat nervous. They don't know who they're getting ready to encounter at the traffic stop. And because of that, things can escalate very, very quickly. You need to be mindful of that. Also, keep in mind, it's not likely that anything is going to happen at the traffic stop that's going to improve your life. So nothing good is going to come out of the traffic stop, but there's almost unlimited downside potential. So your goal, resolve it quickly. It's not a social call. Do what you need to do to get the traffic stop resolved. It's about being efficient. It's about being businesslike. Get it resolved and move on. At a traffic stop, the officer is going to evaluate you. That's going to be one of the first things that the police officer does. So stay in your car. Officers are going to get nervous if as soon as you get pulled over, the first thing you do is open your door and exit your car. Now, the officer may ask you to do that, but until the officer asks you to do that, remain in your car. Stay calm. Be respectful to the police officer. Even if you don't respect police, and you don't have to respect police, you should appear respectful because we don't want to get the officer nervous. You should be cool, you should be calm, collected, move slowly. The last thing you should do is seem upset or mad. Don't be upset. The officer may have a valid reason to pull you over, and it's not a time for you to get upset, start yelling at the officer. Keep your hands on the wheel. The officer is going to look for where your hands are. If your hands are on the wheel at 10 and 2, just like they told you in driving school, the officer will feel a little bit reassured that you at least are not reaching for a gun. Again, this is not a social call. This is not a time for you to be trying to make a new friend with the police officer. It's about being efficient. It's about being professional. It's about being able to resolve the traffic stop quickly. You should evaluate the police officer as well. I've told you the officer is going to evaluate you. You need to evaluate the officer. All officers are not the same. There are different varieties of police officers. What I would call the veteran officer, this is somebody who is going to be very respectful of you. This is generally somebody with a lot of experience, somebody who may come up to the car, be very friendly, be cool, calm, and collected themselves. That's the kind of officer that I would like to see. I wish we had more of them. We do have lots of them. I refer to them as peace officers. Great men and women. Those are, we can't get enough of those type of police officers. So then there's the other variety of officer, which I would call the sneaky officer. This officer is pretending to be your friend, but really this officer is just trying to gather information that he or she can use against you. They're trying to do it very quietly. They'll ask you questions like, do you know how fast you were going? Things like that. They're wanting to get statements out of you. So be mindful of that. But still not the worst variety of police officer that you could have. In my opinion, the worst variety of police officer that you could possibly have is the brand new officer. He's the tough guy, he or she, tough. And this is a sort of a stereotypical thing to say, but generally we're dealing with somebody young, a short haircut, a true believer, somebody who might be angry, somebody who might come up to you and say, do you know how fast you were driving on my road? Things like that. Sometimes motorcycle officers who are there just for traffic enforcement could be these types of officers. Again, I don't want to broad brush all of them, but you should act accordingly. You should be very concerned. This type of an officer is definitely not your friend. This officer is trying to find reasons to arrest you. Do not excite the police officer. So evaluate the officer very quickly and then act accordingly. There are some things that you must do during a traffic stop. First thing, pull over. If the officer flashes you to pull over or yells for you to pull over or uses a hand signal for you to pull over as soon as it's safe for you to do so. Not all of my clients have decided to pull over when those lights come on, and generally speaking, that goes very, very badly for the driver of the automobile. So you must pull over to the side of the road. Do it in a way that is safe. The officer is likely to ask you for license, registration, proof of insurance, those documents. You have to have those documents, and you have to provide those documents. Don't get into some discussion with the officer about, well, why are you asking me for these things, or what did I do wrong? The officer has a right to ask you for license, registration, and proof of insurance, and my advice is that you provide it for the police officer. So thinking a little bit ahead, you may want to have those items ready to go just in case you pulled over, so you're not fumbling and bumbling through your glove box looking for them. Also, if, and this is something that's specific to Arizona, if you have a concealed weapons permit to carry a concealed firearm, and the officer asks you for that permit, you must produce it. You don't have an option. Now, this is something that's new under Arizona law. If the officer asks you if you have a concealed firearm in your vehicle, you must answer that question. So this is something that's new. It's something that I believe is subject to a legal challenge, but it is the law right now in Arizona that if the officer asks you, do you have a gun in your car, you must accurately answer that question. Finally, and this is something that's new as well under Arizona law, if the officer says, give me the gun, you have to give the officer the gun. That doesn't mean you need to volunteer the gun if the officer doesn't ask. But if the officer says, hey, do you have a gun? And you say yes, and the officer says, well, I'd like to take possession of that during this traffic stop, you have to give it to the officer. Make sure you do it in a way that is safe. Also, the officer may say, okay, step out of the vehicle. Lots of officers will do that. the officer has a right to order you and the passengers out of the vehicle. So don't get into some argument with the officer about why do you have to exit the vehicle. You do. That's the law. Once the officer gets you to exit the vehicle, the officer has a right to detain you there at the scene, at least for a short period of time. This section is about things that you should not do during a traffic stop. First off, don't volunteer information. The officer may say things like, hey, where are you coming from, or where are you going to? You don't have to answer those questions, nor should you volunteer things just out of the blue. Again, this is not a social call. You don't have to volunteer information, and you should not volunteer information. Also, don't lie. In Arizona, in many other states, maybe all states, I don't know, it's a crime to lie to a police officer. I'm not suggesting that you lie to a police officer. You should not lie to a police officer, but that's different than just simply not volunteering information or remaining silent. I don't think you should answer the officer's questions. Now, this doesn't mean you need to be a jerk about it. I think that there's a nice way to tell the officer, hey, excuse me, officer, I know you're asking me questions like where am I going and where am I coming from, and blame it on me. Say, hey, I've got a friend, he's a criminal defense attorney, and he told me not to answer any questions. Most officers will respect that. They know you have a right to remain silent. It's a constitutional right, and you should use it. So exercise that right in a nice way, refuse to answer the questions, and keep in mind that there is no downside, none at all, for you refusing to answer a question. Assuming you got arrested and you were charged and your case went to trial, the officer is not going to be able to take the stand at your trial and say, hey, I asked this person questions at the scene and they refused to answer. They're not going to be able to do that. So there's really no downside for you just simply not answering questions. Now, this is an important one as well. Don't argue. Some of my clients in the past have gotten into arguments about constitutional law on the side of the road with the police officer. That is not the place to argue constitutional law. If you think the officer made some mistake, pulled you over without cause or something along those lines, or is detaining you too long, that's something to talk to your attorney about long after the traffic stop is concluded. Do not argue with the police officer on the side of the road. Do not get into any debates with the police officer about anything. Also, and I'll say this the way a criminal defense attorney would say it, which is don't play any games. Now, a prosecutor might call those, or a police officer might call those games that I refer to field sobriety tests or roadside exercises or something like those. These generally will pertain to DUI cases. You'll see people on the side of the road sometimes touching their nose, walking a straight line, standing on one foot, playing games on the side of the road. At least in Arizona, you do not have to play those games on the side of the road. So don't answer any questions, don't engage in any games on the side of the road. And also, don't consent to any searches. Sometimes an officer will say, hey, can I look in your trunk? Can I look in your car? Can I look here? Can I look there? The answer should be, do you have a warrant? If the officer has a warrant, then you have to allow the search. If the officer does not have a warrant, you shouldn't consent to that search. Even if you have nothing to hide, you have a right to privacy. You have a Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And the mere fact that an officer is curious about what might be in your vehicle does not make it a reasonable search. You have a right to get that officer to obtain a warrant. Now, there are exceptions to the warrant requirement. The officer may search anyway, but that's something later on that you can discuss with your attorney. So do not consent to any searches. Also, I mentioned that the driver has to provide license, registration, and proof of identification, license, registration, and proof of insurance, and that's true. Passengers may or may not have to provide identification. In Arizona, the law is that if the passenger is doing something wrong, and the passenger might be doing something wrong, the passenger might be violating some traffic ordinance like failing to wear a seatbelt, or passenger might be doing something that causes the officer to suspect criminal activity. In that case, the passenger has to provide identification. But other than that, if the passenger isn't violating any law and is not suspected of committing any crime, the passenger does not have to provide identification. These are the things that you should do if you're subject to a traffic stop? First off, I think you should determine if indeed you are free to leave. It's okay to ask the police officer, am I free to leave, Mr. Officer or Mrs. Officer? If the officer says no, you're being detained, then that answers that. If the officer says yes, you are free to leave, you should leave. So you might want to figure that out. Sometimes that's unclear, and it certainly would help me or your defense attorney, whoever that may be, really to have a clear understanding about whether or not this is a voluntary encounter with the police officer or if you're free to leave. So ask that question. You should also ask to talk to an attorney immediately. You should say, hey, I want to call my lawyer right now. Arizona has some very good rules that provide more protection than the federal Constitution. You have a right to talk to your attorney as soon as it's reasonably practicable to do so. So if you have a cell phone, you might want to say, excuse me, officer, I'd like to call my attorney right now and ask them some questions. If the officer puts a complaint in your hands and says, hey, here's a complaint, I'm charging you with this or that, and asks you to sign, I think you should sign that document. Generally speaking, that complaint just shows that you've been served, you're just acknowledging the service, and if you don't sign that, the officer will arrest you and take you to jail, and that's really not to your benefit. If you are arrested, then do not resist. You do not have a right to resist even an unlawful arrest. If it's a bad arrest, then your attorney will resolve that later on in the court, not at the side of the road. So do not resist even an unlawful arrest. Don't worry about the officer's failure to read you Miranda. Some officers will, and some officers won't. That's the kind of thing that may help you later on, and I'm talking about your right to remain silent, those types of things. And so if the officer doesn't read that to you, that's just fine. Don't demand the officer read that to you. If you absolutely positively decide you want to talk to the officer, you may want to hold on to my business card. On the back of my card, I have written on there exactly what I recommend that you say to the officer at that point, but I don't really recommend that you say much of anything to the officer, especially if you've just been arrested. Keep in mind that you may be released at the police station. Some officers will arrest you, bring you to the station, they may take some prints or a photograph, but they will ultimately release you, and that's the case in most misdemeanor DUI situations. So if you're acting unruly and you're being a real jerk to the police officer, the officer has discretion to book you into the jail for the night. So you may want to keep that in mind in terms of how you're acting with the police officer. I mentioned that you should call your attorney, and you should, especially at this point, because you may be offered a blood, breath, or urine test. Now, this is different than the small handheld preliminary breath test on the side of the road. So when I said don't play any games on the side of the road, that includes the small handheld breathalyzer on the side of the road. Once you're arrested, however, and they bring you to the station, now you're dealing with a different set of tests, and there are some consequences for refusing that test. And this is the situation you really do need to speak with an attorney about. And so you should ask to call your attorney early and often. Lots of attorneys, including my office, are available 24 hours just for that reason. At my office, you could call our emergency line, which is 480-755-7110. You could dial that number at any time, 24 hours, and especially if it's after hours, even 2 a.m., you'll get a prompt to press a button, and that will connect you immediately to me or some other lawyer at my firm who will assess the situation and then give you some advice in terms of what to do now that you've been arrested. I want to give you some comments on DUI. First off, I would be remiss if I didn't point out how foolish it is to drink alcohol and then drive a motor vehicle. Really, really dumb. And I don't say that as somebody who has any kind of a problem with people drinking alcohol at all. What I do have a problem with is somebody drinking alcohol and then operating a motor vehicle in a way that is unsafe, which can endanger other people. So, very, very foolish to drink and drive. On the legal side, what you think might be a DUI could very quickly turn into either a manslaughter or an aggravated assault. If somebody, as a result of your poor driving from drinking, is either killed or injured very badly. And these are very, very serious cases. I have had people in my office many, many times who thought they were risking a DUI and wound up with a manslaughter. Don't do it. Very bad idea. In terms of DUI, I want to say this, and this is specific to Arizona law, but I believe most states have similar sections. There is a legal limit. At the moment, the legal limit is .08. If you're .08 within 2 hours of the time you're operating a motor vehicle, you lose. But just because you're under .08, it doesn't mean that you will be not guilty of a DUI. You could be found guilty of a DUI even with a reading that is below .08, so long as the state can prove that that alcohol impaired your ability to operate that motor vehicle even to the slightest degree. Now, in Arizona, we have yet another section, which is a DUI illegal drugs section. And that section is not a section that I love, but it's there and you need to know about it. If you have an illegal drug in your system in any amount, so for example, if you smoked marijuana even a week earlier and it is not affecting your ability to operate that motor vehicle at all, you're driving just fine. But if the state can prove that it's in your system at the time that you were driving the motor vehicle at all, then you're guilty of a DUI drugs, and that carries some very severe consequences. There's also a felony DUI out there. It's a serious felony. It's in Arizona, we call it a Class 4 felony. It's a designated felony. It's a serious crime, and the way you get there is by having a license problem, like a suspended or restricted or revoked license at the time you get your DUI, or you get your third DUI within 7 years. So, of course, you want to avoid that. In terms of punishments, in Arizona, even a first-time misdemeanor DUI has mandatory jail time attached to it. The fines are ever increasing. You should expect thousands of dollars in fines. You should expect license problems. Counseling for alcohol or drugs. There's an ignition interlock device which will cost you money every month and be on your vehicle probably for a year. There'll be points assessed to your license. You may have to go to traffic survival school. It will cause your insurance rates to go up. A DUI is a very, very serious crime. And also keep in mind that much of the evidence against you in a DUI case will be the subjective opinion of the officer. So, the shorthanded way to say it, do not drink and drive. Very bad idea. In closing, I just want to say the justice system can be a very, very scary place. It's the kind of place you really, really want to avoid. Our prison system is very overcrowded. Arizona is one of the national leaders in terms of the percentage of people that we incarcerate. The prison population has increased 347% since 1980. National spending on prison has gone from $10 billion to $50 billion in just the last 20 years. Arizona has 40,000 inmates approximately right now and spends about $1 billion a year. It is big, big business. Lots of these people, by the way, who are incarcerated are nonviolent. Some of them have committed victimless crimes, and of course some of them are likely innocent. So the system is in dire need of reform. Don't get caught in it. I hope I've provided you with some helpful information in terms of avoiding getting caught up in the system, and then how to conduct yourself in the event of a traffic stop, which really, for most people, is the launching pad into the system. So again, I want to give you my website where there's lots of information about me and my firm and some of the articles that I've written, which could give you some more detailed information. It's also a good way to contact me. My website is www.attorneyforfreedom.com, attorney for FOR, freedom.com. And the main number at my law firm is 480-755-7110. Feel free to call anytime. Thank you.